Welcome to Conversations in Leadership, a partnership with Gospel Today and the Potter's House. I'm here today joined by Mr. Curtis Wallace, the Chief Operating Officer of TDJ Enterprises. Mr. Wallace, how are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you, Roland?
Doing great, doing great. Mr. Wallace is also an author of a new book called The Leadership Gap. Before we get into our conversation today, why don't you share a bit about The Leadership Gap and what kind of prompted you to write that book and what themes you touch on in that book?
Well, over the course of my career, I've worked with not only with the Potter's House and with T.D. Jakes, but in my prior life as a lawyer, I've worked with a lot of different big ministries all over the country, big ministries, small ministries, and I just started to see a lot of similarities between the organizations. And really what prompted me to write the book was that I was seeing all these great anointed pastors and leaders out there, but what they didn't have with them was the infrastructure built around them. They didn't have the team to really enable them to fulfill their calling, to fulfill their destiny in the way that they really could if they built the right leadership team. And that's really where the leadership gap comes from. So I wrote the book in an attempt to help to give these people, some of the leaders, some of the tools that they might need to be able to build the teams around them. So in the book I talk about things like, what does the pastor need to know from the staff that the staff is not telling him or her? What does the staff know about the pastor? How do you build the right board of directors? How do you find the right outside experts like legal and accountants and PR and things like that to work with your organization to build out your team? That's really what I talk about.
Yeah, well, that fits perfectly with what we're going to talk about today, and it's very applicable to what leaders across the country are facing. What we're going to talk today about is being a yes man. Mr. Wallace says, every visionary leader needs people around him, as you said, who will help him or her bring the vision to reality and actually sustain that vision. However, leaders can often fail to see many of the important details about and potential problems about the idea, the vision, the course of action that they suggest. They just kind of see the big picture. When is it right for a person on the team, a staff person, a minister, a deacon, someone that's not the pastor, to be a yes man and just kind of say, yes, pastor, we're with you, we can do this, all things are possible, and when is it right to be that person that nitpicks and says, well, if we do that, this is going to happen, and that's going to happen, what about this, and what about that? How do you kind of work the tension between those two?
Well, one of the things I talked about last year at our Pastors Leaders Conference in Orlando, and I also talked about it in the book, The Leadership Gap, is that I think, particularly within the church world, that we have a real lack of telling truth to power. And this goes to the whole question, of being a quote yes man. And I think, God has made each one of us to be unique. Nobody else has more unique set of life experience, educational experience, work experience, all those things that come together that make you you. And if you are going to be serving in the church, then you owe it not only to your leader, to your pastor, but also to God to give that leader the very best of you. And that means being truthful, with the pastor. And, sometimes I know that it's hard for anybody to disagree with their employer, to disagree with their boss.
Sure.
When you add on top of that this boss is also your pastor and your spiritual leader, then it's compounded. And so there's such a tremendous need to please, if you will, among the staff that very often you do end up in the situation where you have a lot of, quote, yes men, on the pastor's staff. And, I'm not saying that you need to disagree for the sake of disagreeing. You need to do it in an appropriate way, in a respectful way. But just like Bishop Jakes really depends upon me to be the one helping to think through all the details. It's his job to cast vision. It's my job to help execute that vision. And when I see things that may become obstacles or different possibilities, it's my job to present him with the options, not just to know what the problems are, but to be a problem solver and say, hey, Bishop, I understand you want to do this, but it's going to mean A, B, and C, so maybe we ought to think about these other options as another way to try to accomplish our goal.
Yeah, so if you find yourself in that position where you see something that your leader wants to do, and maybe you see a few things or think you know a few things that leader doesn't, would you give maybe a few tips for approaching the leader in a way that you'll actually be heard and received well?
Well, a couple things. First of all, before I really answer the question, I want to also say something to the pastor, and that it's up to the pastor to set the tone and make clear to his staff that he welcomes discussion, and he welcomes input, and he welcomes thought. If the pastor is shutting down anything that's dissents towards his point of view, then all he is going to get is the yes answer.
Right.
So first, the pastor needs to set the tone. Secondly, it's up to the staff just to be appropriate, and sometimes, it's appropriate to say something during the meeting, but sometimes it's also more appropriate not to say anything in the meeting, but then to circle back around, and either through email or a phone call or some other private communication. And it just depends on what the situation is and who's in the room and who's in the meeting and those kind of things. People have to be cognizant of the situation that they're in, and play it in the appropriate way. You have to know your pastor and know when is the best point in time to have conversation.
Sure. Well, pastors, leaders, staff people, we hope that you're going to join us May 3rd through the 5th in Orlando, Florida. We'll be there for the Pastors and Leaders Conference. Mr. Curtis Wallace will be there on hand as a presenter for the second year in a row, and so we really encourage everybody to get down there, check out the website, be sure to register on and log on today to pastorsandleaders.org. Thanks again for joining us today, Mr. Wallace. You have a great day.
Thank you.